An important turning point in my life occurred to me a few years back. Seemed like everything was spiraling downward. My life, my mental health, and my bank account. As the city streets below were pounded by strong traffic, there were occasions when I would go weeks without sleeping. I noticed an increase in the number of homeless individuals. Needles and crack pipes lying around, muggings, assaults, overdoses, and fatalities every time I ventured outdoors. I could tell it was time to get out of there because the city had turned into a wasteland. I was single and without a spouse or children. I hardly spoke to my siblings when my parents passed away a few years ago. I felt like I was slowly dying within, and there was nothing holding me to this place. At that point, I packed up my car, sold almost everything I had, and headed north to Alaska in the hopes of beginning over. In the midst of its magnificent mountains and mysterious, enchanted woods, I purchased a little cabin and some property. During the winter months, celestial phenomena known as the northern lights would illuminate the sky in a celestial wave pattern, casting a celestial glow that seemed to emanate from God. Even though I felt a little better after moving, the thing that had been bothering me all along had followed me thousands of miles into this seemingly unending wilderness for a very long time. I would deny that I was the root of my problems, reason being, I am always present wherever I go, to paraphrase a wise man. Besides the continual danger of wolves, bears, and moose, I had no serious problems throughout my 3 months of residence in that cabin. In my backyard, I had a little garden, a solar panel for power, and a shotgun and rifle for hunting. I remarked, "This is life," as I sat in a hammock I had hung over the cabin's corner and gazed out at the boundless splendor. Below, in the backdrop of dense evergreen clusters, towering mountains with snow-capped peaks appeared gigantic. Everything shimmered and sparkled as a fresh blanket of fluffy snow fell. Neither a house nor a road could be seen. Imagine a world without pollution, constant horn blaring, work, and worry. With my eyes closed, I inhaled deeply of the fresh air. A couple hours later, I woke up as the sun began to set. Having fallen asleep throughout that time, as the light faded and dipped behind the mountains, it left behind a crimson smudge and a dazzling orange streak. I slowly stood up, making instant coffee while tripping over the kettle. While I sipped it, I aimlessly searched the room for something to occupy my time. It had taken me a long time to sort through all the strange stuff that the previous owner had left behind. Upon moving in, I discovered a well-stocked bookcase brimming with works by respected authors such as Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and Philip K. Dick. Feeling bored, I began perusing the collection in search of anything enjoyable to occupy my time. I was shuffling past Ubik and a maze of death when I noticed something. Standing there was a black leather-bound book devoid of any title or author's name. The cover became worn and discolored over time. Inquisitive, I took it out and gave it a good shake. It became clear to me that the prior owner had left it as a diary when I noticed the neat copperplate script of cursive writing across the pages. On January 9, 2015, the first entry was made. It stated this: "Maybe I'm going crazy, but I can't tell. My therapist suggested that I try keeping a journal when I visited her in town yesterday. She keeps acting as if everything is in my head, but I know that's not the case. I thought I had entered paradise the moment I stepped foot in the cabin. I would have never guessed that something would be skulking about in the dark. Where did it come from? It's following me like a shadow, looking through windows and hiding under my bed. I am currently snowed in, holding a pistol and a cup of coffee. No more sleep for me. Some movement under the bed keeps rattling my nerves, as if a lifeless body with dirt in its lungs had reanimated. I occasionally believe I can make out the sound of labored breathing. Those dark specks had captured my eye. No matter what it is, the skin is so slack that it might easily slip off the bone. A lean, nude man might be the best description. It has black, rotting eyes. Its back is curved, and its twisted spine protrudes like malignancies. Its motion is so sluggish and choppy that I'm never able to keep up with it. Everything about its figure is crooked and disjointed. At times, it would fold its legs in an awkward manner as soon as I try to capture a video of it or turn on the lights. It always vanishes. Still, you can smell the putrid gas, like an infectious scent. It clings to the cabin like a lovely perfume. What does it want from me? I have no idea. I am ready to go, however. I am unable to return to town due to the outside storm. So I am stuck here. A 5-foot mound of snow encircles the cabin, like a captive animal whose master is a savage. You never know when it will attack, even though she insists she hasn't heard or seen anything. My wife keeps disappearing on me. She vanished last night among a snowfall. What became of her? She claimed to have been present throughout when I questioned her first thing in the morning. Nothing had stuck with her. She definitely did not go into town. Time was of the essence, and the trails were too treacherous to continue that far down. The truth is, I have no idea what's happening here. Our lives are in danger, and I am terrified. Because I was no longer interested in reading, I slammed the diary shut. I was afraid I would catch a communicable form of cabin fever. I truly preferred not to know if the previous owner had gone mad in the mountains, and began to see crawling, nude corpses. I returned the journal to its place on the shelf, rather than navigating a labyrinth of peril. As I sped through the novella, I attempted to block out the diary entries. I fought the mental image of the twisted, nude man with the rotten eyes all night long. Finally, just before daybreak, I dozed off, however. I believed I caught a glimpse of a figure in the window just before I drifted off to sleep. An enthusiastic man whose dark eyes looked like they were about to burst from his head, who was obviously starving. Leaning forward, I thought I caught a glimpse of him pressing his extraordinarily long fingers against the glass. I sat up and peered out onto the snowy landscape, blinking as I did so. Nothing existed in that location. Near my cottage, there was another hunter who would sometimes follow the tracks of deer. About a quarter of a mile away, on a white, snow-covered lake, the water was frozen solid. Wrapped in my warmest layers, I braved the icy morning air to set out for a hike. With my shotgun in hand, I fastened my snowshoes, much like I always did whenever I stepped outside. After all, I had no idea when a polar bear could be lurking beyond the next tree, all around my house. I could see footsteps pressed into the snow as I opened the door. For a moment, I confused it with the eerie figure from the diary, that silhouette I had seen. The tracks, however, did not extend to my window. They veered off the path 20 feet away, heading for the frozen lake at the base of the slope. A quick look downwards was all I could muster. Watch a shadowy figure move stealthily ahead. Recognizing my sole neighbor within for miles, I cried out to Steve. On his own little piece of land, he owned a cabin situated around 1 mile distant. The abrupt sound plainly surprised him, and he leaped to his feet. As he twirled around, his gun held aloft, his heavy fur coat and black snow leggings swishing. Together, he quickly lowered it and raised a gloved hand to greet me as soon as he saw me. "Hello there, Josh. Surprised to see you up this early," he yelled over the muted wintry landscape. Sounds always seemed different after it snowed, as if all the noise in the world had become faded and dead. "Yeah, I've been having a little trouble sleeping," I said, slinging my shotgun around my shoulder. "What are you doing anyway?" "Just a little hunting, you know," he said, giving me a sly wink. "Animals are always most active around dusk and dawn. It seems that's when I always have the best luck anyway." He approached me, looking at me with his gaze. "Yes, you do appear terrible. The bags beneath your eyes are large enough to hold groceries. Listen, I am well informed. Excuse me if this sounds strange, but were you acquainted with the cabin's former owner?" "Excuse me?" I inquired. Scrawny old Steve's face contorted into a frown. Almost instantly, he started to look remote and guarded. "Yes, we did meet," he declared with an air of candor. He looked at my face as if he were looking for something, but I couldn't tell what. Because of his response, I felt uneasy and off my rocker. "Is he among us still?" I said. I declared. Steve's eyebrows furrowed. "Buddy, I'm confused about the situation, but he's passed away. He has passed away. It was in that cabin that he passed away." Accusatively, he wiggled his finger toward my house. My stomach felt like it was going to plummet when I heard those words. My body was flooded with waves of fear. Just how was he killed? I inquired if it was like a heart attack. Steve shifted his focus to the ground. He averted his gaze from mine. Did you know that out of all 50 states, Alaska has the nation's highest rate of missing persons? Nothing even comes close. Statistically, we have the highest rate of unaccounted for disappearances relative to the size of our population. A name has been given to it. As Steve put it, the Alaska Triangle. And we're right in the thick of it. I wasn't sure what he was getting at, so I just gazed at him. To me, it looked like an attempt to sidestep the question I had. No, I was unaware of that, I said. Steve lifted his head once more and gave a nod. He let out a heavy breath. I mean, it's kind of unsettling what happened with the previous owner and his wife. I will inform you if you are truly interested, but rest assured, it will do nothing to alleviate your anxiety. On top of that, it will do nothing to assist you in falling asleep. I want to know. I insisted instantly. The wind started to whip past us. Flakes of ice and snow flew sideways in the sudden currents. Let's go back to your cabin then, Steve said, pulling his heavy fur-lined hood off and shaking out his long black hair behind him. I could use a bit of whiskey to warm up. We sat down with a bottle of Johnny Walker and 2 shot glasses. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Steve certainly was. He chugged 3 shots in the span of a minute. I sipped at mine, drinking half and putting it back down on the coffee table with a thunk. Steve grunted, hissing through his open mouth for a moment. Ugh, that's the good stuff, he said, slamming his chest as the burning liquor worked its way down. Steve looked up at me with a new sparkle in his eyes. Huh, so you want to know about what happened to Lenning? Well, I'll tell you that no one really knows the whole story. I used to see him occasionally, come down and have a drink and talk. We all know each other round here, obviously. I nodded, motioning him on. He appeared to be an ordinary, upright man. Actually, he seemed somewhat reminiscent of you. The American dream's cancer, the fast-paced city life, is something this young man is desperately attempting to leave behind. I don't know how long he stayed, maybe a few months. There was no apparent problem. On occasion, we would go skeet shooting and, have a beer. We used to play poker every now and then with a couple of other hunters who lived closer to town. Well, as always seemed perfectly normal to me. What occurred to him was completely beyond my control. As he gazed out the window at the rugged mountains, a pang of longing was visible on his face. What became of him anyway? To encourage him to continue, I inquired. He began to recount the nighttime experience of someone looking into his window. He described lying in the dark and hearing noises coming from under his bed. Respiration and fumbling sound like an illness. He went to the point of leaving his cabin's lights on all the time. Steve crouched down beside me. His pale, wrinkled face betrayed a hint of terror. He began to become completely insane. I began searching everywhere by digging holes. It was not uncommon for me to spot him outside digging, even during the thickest snowstorms. It was as if he no longer slept at all. I had never seen anything like cabin fever before. I arrived here, worried, just a few weeks thereafter. Quite unusually, I hadn't had any communication from him for a few days when I arrived. The door was ajar. Will lay propped up in a chair where you are now, a shotgun at his feet, and a blast hole visible through his head. A blood-stained diary, with the middle page open, was discovered next to him. Spatters of blood marred the final submission, yet discernible. It seemed as if I had leaned down and read it. It lasted for barely a couple of phrases. I silently swept my eyes across the bookcase where the identical journal rested. I see now what's going on was the message it communicated. The deceitful man is guiding me towards the reality. I will locate it now at last. In the midst of my racing heart, I inquired as to whether or not that was his suicide note. A little nod escaped his lips. Yeah, in order to have some rangers come and have a look. I traveled into town. Cops and CSI were eventually dispatched to the scene. According to him, the diary was among the items taken as evidence. Adieu. In my opinion, it is never helpful to read something like that. As a virus, delusions can spread at times. Understand what I'm saying. It was true, but I remained silent. I turned my attention back to the journal, which had a shiny black leather cover that resembled a serpent in a crouch. How did the journal end up back here if the cops seized it as evidence? Are you saying that he also had a wife residing here? Excuse me, I inquired. He confirmed that she vanished at roughly the same time. Seems strange. When the police approached, he shook his head glumly, but she remained. No one ever saw her again. As far as anyone could tell, it was as if she had vanished without a trace. I strode clumsily up to the bookcase and removed the journal after Steve departed. I turned the pages by hand. The final entrance was located in the center, like Rain's aged. Darker blood splattered across the page. The date was visible on the suicide note that I discovered. The date was January 27th, 2015. Shortly after beginning to see the twisted man, Lenning passed away. For a moment, I considered whether mine would be an identical story. As I sat at the little round kitchen table with the diary and some stewed venison and rice, I read through the entries as the sun began to drop outside. In the end, Lenning revealed that the deranged man wasn't the cause of the great evil, but rather was attempting to lead him in the right direction. I felt a surge of wrath at his ignorance, so I scoffed. His death was clearly caused by his innocence. Suddenly, though, clarity hit me like a bolt of lightning. Is it possible that I might be engaging in similar foolishness? Maybe I should just pack up my belongings and go. It would just take me a few hours to go to town on the snowmobile. Still, I felt a strong pull to remain, drawn by the enigmaticism of the situation. I knew I wouldn't be leaving that night, as my curiosity beckoned like a siren luring sailors to their doom. My search for answers would ultimately lead me to disappointment. I had slept off while holding a half-empty bottle of beer. The TV I was sitting in front of could only receive signals from satellites, the absence of any telephone or cable. Wires winding through the woods was predictable. Energy from the sun was stored and used to power everything. The energy output was more than enough, even in the winter. Because I seldom ever watch TV and mainly use it to cook or heat water for bathing. However, I required its soundtrack, with its incoherent glimmering of lights and colors and robotic laughter. For this evening, it was as effective as a candle in driving away the smothering, creepy presence. My body jolted awake. Static appeared on the television. The speakers spewed forth a hissing white noise that sounded like a swarm of snakes. I took a quick look at the time. At 300 meters, I stood there for a long time, bewildered, scanning the dimly lit cabin. What had roused me from my slumber so suddenly was a mystery to me. Even through the worst Alaskan winter storms with their blizzard-like gusts and icy hail, the satellite had never gone down. The static on the TV began to rise and fall in a flickering pattern across the screen. Black lines moved horizontally. I thought I heard faint words beneath the white noise for a second as the hissing intensified into a gurgling. It sounded like a man's last gasp as he was drowning slow and sickly breathing. And picture appeared on the screen as a black line soared over the television. All sounds inside the cabin vanished, leaving only the piercing, icy wind outside. Perplexed by what I was seeing, I drew near to the screen. A room's live video stream appeared to be the source. Inspecting it more closely, I recognized it as my cabin. There I was, reflected in the chair, crouching near the display. My virtual twin on the screen mimicked my motion by raising her hand. A chill ran down my spine like ice water as a flood of fear washed over me. Tell me what I'm looking at. Looking back to the spot where the camera ought to be, I mumbled something. In one nook, there was nothing except a rough wooden ceiling. Back at the screen, I was on the verge of screaming. At the same moment, a white, nude man crouched behind my chair as I watched TV. He got to his feet with clumsy steps. He trembled and twisted as his fractured spine shook. A voice that hissed came from the speakers. Its voice was filled with the stench of writhing maggots and grime. A murderer. He is. It gurgled like the shadow of death. A great many have perished. This forest is home to many buried bodies. Next up, you. He wants to see how you react. My shoulders were approached by a pair of long, fractured fingers. Their nails tarnished and discolored. Pulled myself away from the chair, tripping over my own feet as I whirled around in dread. There was a clatter of glass and a burst of light as the TV shattered to the floor as my back collided with it. I thought I had a glimpse of a pale, sunken face with rotten, blackened eyes peering out from behind the chair in the brief minutes before oblivion enveloped me. I flipped on every light switch in the cabin, but the deranged man was still nowhere to be found. However, I was aware that I needed to leave that place. The voice's warning lingered in my mind. Why hadn't the monster murdered me while I slept if it intended to assault me? It all didn't add up. Somebody was observing me, that depraved dude. Moreover, why would he bother to warn me if he was? I couldn't help but wonder whether that was psychological warfare. Maybe the sick man just enjoyed messing about with his meal before he devoured it. As I layered on snow trousers, a couple bulky sweaters, and coats, my mind went into a tailspin of thoughts. To protect myself from frostbite, I wore as many layers of clothing as possible. It was decided I was going to go away, despite the fact that the entire terrain was covered in snow tonight. I was warned that the wind chill would be as cold as an ice blade rubbing against my flesh. Traveling in such conditions during the middle of the night, when temperatures could drop to below 30 degrees, was exceedingly risky. It turned out that Steve was correct. Out of all the states, Alaska has the greatest rate of missing persons. The remains of several individuals were never recovered, most likely because they were buried in the thick snow hundreds of miles from any civilization. I mounted my snowmobile, took aim with my shotgun, and began making my way to Steve's cottage. I was hoping to wait till morning to figure out what to do next, but destiny had other plans. As I navigated the twisting, tiny deer route, I couldn't help but feel like someone was keeping an eye on me, as if they were ravenous hands. The evergreen branches encroached on my coat and legs. As I walked along the trail, on multiple occasions, I got the uncanny sensation of seeing a pale, nude figure standing in the snow. But each time I turned my head to look, it was vanished. When Steve's house finally came into view, I let out a sigh of relief. The tiny windows of his wood home let me see the lights glimmering. With my head down, I drew up beside his door. Two sets of tracks, one somewhat smaller than the other, were visible to me. No big deal. I just shrugged it off as strange, and sucking gurgling signaled the snowmobile's shutdown. Many times, I pounded on the door. After a little while, Steve showed up, looking drowsy and just partially dressed. His eyes darted from side to side as he examined me closely. A frown formed on his already wrinkled face. "Steve, I need your favor," I hurriedly exclaimed. "My cottage is experiencing some strange phenomena. Is it okay if I remain here until morning? Until I can, perhaps, go shopping. There is no way I am going to spend the night at my apartment." Inviting me in, he yawned and gave me the look. "How about you take a nap on the sofa?" Steve spoke up. "But dude, you better secure that firearm." He had a bedroom in his cabin with a divider. It was much bigger than my little cottage, which just had one room, a shared kitchen and living area with a small bedroom and bathroom. But it was still very functional. As he slammed the door behind him and went back into his bedroom, he waved indifferently toward a worn-out couch in the corner. Still, I had trouble sleeping. With caution, I made my way around the room to examine Steve's bookcase. The literature he liked were a little offbeat. There are a lot of true crime and in rural episodes. There were a ton of novels about serial killers including Richard Ramirez, Herbert Mullen, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Bundy. Near the conclusion, an enormous, unmarked, and weathered black binder was visible. For a split second, it looked like that leather-bound journal, and my heart sank. But rationally, I understood that this was merely a coincidence. My interest was piqued, so I proceeded to retrieve the binder, the contents horrified and terrified me. The entire length of it was covered by several news clippings. The first news item was from almost 2 decades ago and concerned a hiker who went missing in an Alaskan forest. The fact that her remains were never located led her family to hold out hope that she might be alive, according to a subsequent one. After that, it repeated itself on every subsequent page, promising a prize for any information. Woman gone, prostitute killed, male nowhere to be found. Nothing has been found. As I continued to peruse, news articles regarding Will Lenning's wife's abrupt disappearance and suicide began to pop up. Steve had scribbled "haha" next to the suicide article in red marker. From behind me, I could make out the sound of a gun being cocked. I went completely silent as Steve's barely audible voice echoed across the room. "My friend, how are you enjoying my work?" With an air of jocular mockery, he inquired. As I gazed at the man I believed I knew, my grip on the binder of horrors remained firm. "Is that you? Did you really murder Will Lenning and his wife?" "Oh, seemingly, there are much more women." As though I were engrossed in a dream, the whole thing seemed surreal. A smile crept over Steve's face, but his blue eyes maintained an icy, unfeeling expression. In any case, she was already cheating on him with me. Or number two, you. "No, in the end, they always get what they deserve," he growled, his voice betraying his animosity. "I'm sorry, it's true. Another harlot was just dispatched by me tonight. I was going to put you off until later. At this very moment, the desire isn't overwhelming. There are cycles to it, you know. The onset is gradual. A hint of white, nude skin undulating behind Steve caught my eye. Behind him, the contorted guy advanced with jerking motions. I remained silent, my expressionless eyes filled with a mix of awe and dread. "A little assistance would be helpful," I murmured. Stephen let out a laugh. "Help, a needle poke, is the extent of their assistance for individuals like myself. Of course, you are aware of that. That's why you should never get caught red-handed." A long, fractured finger was ran across Steve's neck by the contorted man. Steve leaped and screamed in agony. Screaming, he turned around. Next to the couch, I peered over at my shotgun. As Steve whirled around to face me again and fired his weapon twice, I leaped for it. I was hit on the head by the first bullet as it soared through the air, spitting wood fragments. However, the second one severed my leg. My shin was engulfed in a chilling, searing agony. As I twisted and fired the shotgun, I let forth cries of pain and rage. In its path through Steve's brain, the slug caused his skull to explode. When he fell, his forehead smashed like a melon, and blood and splinters splattered all over the wall behind him. Crouching down, the contorted guy beamed up at me. As I peered back at him, gasping for air, I could feel warm blood spurting from my leg. I thought I might pass away. "You weren't even remotely interested in me, were you?" "Excuse me?" I inquired. Your target was Steve. The depraved man, however, remained silent. He retreated to the bedroom's shadows and vanished after a considerable amount of time. I instantly understood everything as the night drew near morning, and my mind wandered to the words spoken by the deranged man on the TV. A murderer. He is an ominous specter. A great many have perished. This forest is home to many buried bodies. Necks up, you. He wants to see how you react. He had absolutely no intention of causing me harm. I should have heeded his warnings. Attempts to alert Will Lenning and his wife had likely also been made by him. I clenched my jaw and placed gauze around my leg. The bullet had penetrated the flesh cleanly, and although the wound appeared puckered and deep, my foot was still mobile. I doused it with alcohol, wailing in agony as it sliced through my flesh. I ingested a handful of prescription medications with a beer, after searching Steve's restroom for them. The agony of riding into town on an amputated limb was something I anticipated necessitating a opiate high. The sun came up, and I trudged out of the cabin, past the blood-stained floorboards, to my snowmobile. I stole a quick peek back at that gruesome spot. The sight of so much suffering and death. Before I departed, the deformed man stood in the open doorway, slouched over with a smirk on his decaying lips as he stared at me. With clumsy motions, he waved his hand in the air. As I revved up the engine and made my way into town, I returned the gesture.